You've been waiting all week for that Saturday show. Tune in, see what happened, let your troubles go. Work real hard, now it's time to take it slow. Kick back and relax with that Saturday show.
Good morning, Albuquerque, and welcome to another episode of That Saturday Show. I'm Jim Harvey, your host, and I have the distinct pleasure of being joined again today by Lara Dale. Lara, welcome back again.
So happy to be here.
Oh, you're like a breath of fresh air, and it just puts me in mind of the fact that it seems like the weather's getting better, and this is a time when I feel like I can go out and buy things for my garden and start planting in hopes that things will start popping up and I can begin to engage in my therapy again, which is gardening. You know, I'm really excited.
And I
about
like
that.
the analogy that it's the seeds of new growth,
Yes.
which we all need desperately right now.
Yeah, it's so necessary. So necessary. So let's do some news clips first, okay? All right. On the national front, the Virgin Island Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett is my latest hero. Some dumb fascist Republican member of Congress stated on the floor of Congress that black people were not into traditional families. Plaskett hit the roof, and she took to the floor of Congress and publicly rebuked this idiot and reminded him that despite everything that America has done to destroy our families over the last 400 years, we've endured and flourished, reminding that fascists of America's original sins cannot be overstated. Bravo.
And this is exactly why they don't want black women in office, because they speak truth to power and they do it very eloquently.
Strong black women. Scares people, doesn't it? Oh, yeah.
Good
yeah.
scare, not bad scare.
That's right. That's right. Bravo, Congresswoman Plaskett,
Bravo.
for standing up like she did. It's just incredible. So keep an eye on the southern states and even Arizona, as they're still fighting the Civil War, everybody. They're still fighting the Civil War. This time they're trying to turn back the clock on voting rights. And I see Supreme Court cases in the future. I don't know what you think about that, Lara.
Well, what's interesting is we're going to be talking about public access, and public access, which we are doing right now, actually started with all the civil rights movements for free speech, but particularly around the black and white discrimination issues of voting rights. So it's very fascinating that we are coming completely full circle in this show to the exact same issues from 1967 that we were fighting before. I mean, we're on a slightly different platform, but this is a circular battle that we all need to just keep vigilant on.
You've just got to stay woke, everybody. Locally, Mayor Keller has announced his pick for police chief, and it's Harold Medina. Medina's been serving as acting chief, and he finally got the nod earlier in this week. Interesting that during this time when the Department of Justice is still in here, supposedly slugging away for us, and mind you, it's been 8 years, Tom Dent, our director, commented last week that it had been 4 years since the Department of Justice had been here working with us on the consent decree, and then he suddenly realized, nope, it's not 4 years, it's 8 years. So he told me I'd better make certain that I correct that on his behalf. Sadly, nothing has changed. Can you believe that? But interesting new developments in the APD. They're going to split the department into 2 divisions, and the second division is going to be headed up by a black man named Sylvester Stanley, who's going to run the public safety division of the police department. It's going to have full power and authority and operate autonomously. Finally, sound the alarm. Bernalillo County Sheriff Manny Gonzalez has officially filed his candidacy for mayor of Albuquerque. We can't have that. Let's throw up that firewall and see to it that this town doesn't sink into fascism if he wins. It's so important. Come Next, come this evening, Breonna Taylor Candlelight Vigil at the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. Silent vigil. Come and join. And now, it's time for a tribute to Sally Alice Thompson.
I proclaim March 8, 2021 as Sally Alice Thompson Day.
Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice is so proud. This is an extremely proud moment when one of our own, Sally Alice Thompson, has been presented with a proclamation from the mayor of the city of Albuquerque that declares Monday, March 8th, as Sally Alice Thompson Day. This is quite an honor for someone who, at the age of 97, has devoted so much of her life to the causes of peace and justice. I'm going to read this proclamation to you because I think all of you need to hear what's been said. Executive order from the office of the mayor. Whereas Sally Alice Thompson has tirelessly served her country and her community by serving in the United States Navy in World War II and by working as a fourth grade teacher in Albuquerque for 20 years. And whereas Sally Alice has dedicated her adult life to working for peace and justice for all citizens of the world by walking across the nation in her golden years to protest nuclear weapons. And whereas Sally Alice has lived and worked in the Duke City for almost 70 years, and whereas she has generously donated her time and money to organizations that advance the causes of peace, and whereas Sally Alice is known nationwide as a respected author and revered voice for peace and justice, and whereas Sally Alice successfully promoted Albuquerque sister city relations with Ashgabat, Turkmenistan, and whereas the mayor, now therefore, I, Timothy M. Keller, mayor of the city of Albuquerque, do hereby proclaim March 8th, 2021 as Sally Alice Thompson Day, and it's signed by our own mayor, Tim Keller. This is quite an honor, and it's just a wonderful thing to be able to say that I know and work with Sally Alice so closely. She is the heart and the conscience of the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice and has been since its inception. She made it possible for us to be here, and we want to continue to honor her in any way and every way we possibly can. This is an incredible event in her life and in the history of the Center for Peace and Justice. And now I'd like to introduce Charles Powell. Charles is the President Emeritus of the Donald and Sally Alice Thompson chapter, number 63 of Veterans for Peace, right here in Albuquerque. Charles, welcome.
She's a teacher, a philanthropist, a singer-songwriter, humanitarian, author, and good friend of mine. I give you Sally Alice Thompson.
Thanks again, Charles. That was very, very, very nice of you. I appreciate it a great deal. And I'm happy to be here on International Women's Day. And I've been thinking about a lot of things recently. Well, all the time I think about things. It occurs to me that our stated values are in the Declaration of Independence, that all people, it says all men, but it should include all women and all children, are entitled to have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. People that are living on the streets in Albuquerque are not pursuing a hell of a lot of happiness when they're cold and hungry and tired and have no place to that's comfortable to sleep. Well, I want to tell you that when the COVID check comes, I'm going to make a fairly substantial contribution to the Peace Center, and I hope that you will join me too, because our Peace Center here in Albuquerque is a very important organization, and we're going to have to support it financially if it's going to continue. We have a wonderful new director, Jim Harvey, and we need to support him and support the work of the Peace Center.
Sally Ellis Thompson, she is indeed not just the conscience of the Peace and Justice Center, but she's the conscience of peace and justice wherever we struggle for it. That's quite a tribute, and there's so much more that can be said. Just a reminder again, this Saturday, today, not next week, but today, 6:30, candlelight vigil, parking lot, Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice, Harvard and Silver Southeast. We need you there. Bring your candle or we'll give you one. It's time to pay tribute to Breonna Taylor's memory. We want you to join us for that big event. And now, we've got a founder's tribute.
I was involved in commercial television. Started in my hometown. Eventually, I went to New York City. Started as a page at NBC. I got involved in a film project with Johnny Cash, and after that was over, I was freelancing, looking for jobs, and someone mentioned Open Channel in New York, the public access group. Right. So since I didn't have any other work at the time, I went in and volunteered, and that was my first introduction to public access, the concept and the equipment. And I did that for about a year or so, and the people from Fort Wayne, Indiana, were setting up one of the people who was trying for the contract for the cable system. Came to New York and to Open Channel and said, can you send a couple people to Fort Wayne for the Three Rivers Festival they have every year, and just to set up some cameras and show people what public access is all about. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to use it as one of the levers to get the contract for the franchise. So we also set up a nonprofit organization to videotape. In Fort Wayne, there was a guy who had been doing community discussion programs for a number of years called Theater for Ideas. Mm-hmm. And we set up a video production wing of that group, and we started videotaping the discussion groups and putting them on the local cable channel there. And
I'm Denise Makeley, and I met Bill Makeley during that process. I was enrolled at the university, and we met, and I got an internship at Sundown Video, which was the production arm of Theatre for Ideas, and we would both take videotapes out to the channel, and eventually decided it was the winters in Fort Wayne were not to our liking.
Too much snow.
Right.
So we decided to find somewhere in the Southwest. Bill had lived in the Southwest earlier in his life, and we felt it would be a good place because it's very, very much like Australia as well, which is where I came from. And we worked at it and went for a trip out here and found out
In
that
78.
that Tucson wasn't a good bet because there were already people involved in trying to get access set up. Santa Fe wasn't a good bet because the fellow that ran the cable company there said he didn't want to hear anything about public access.
He said, I tried it before, I'll never do it again. He hung up on me.
So we thought that Albuquerque was the place to be, and we knew that Albuquerque was one of the top 100 franchises in the country, and that way it would be obliged to provide an educational public access and government access. So we thought that was a winner. So we went back, saved up a lot of money, brought over two big bread vans filled with old equipment, antiquated equipment,
Old broadcast stuff, TK11 black and white cameras from the studio.
And then traditional pioneer form broke down in Wagon Mound.
Of course.
But we managed to get to Albuquerque, and the first place that we set up for our media centre was an abandoned building with all the windows broken on 2nd Street, which used to be Second Street, which used to be Trank's Barber Shop. And so we cleaned that out a little bit and set up, quote unquote, filed the articles of incorporation, and that was the whole.
What year?
The whole plan was.
We arrived in October of '79, but I don't think we actually incorporated. It was either in late '79 or early '80 that we incorporated, quote unquote.
Yeah, we actually.
And we set up a board and had a lawyer on the board and community members to try and involve as many people as possible. And then we expanded later to 816 Second, so there were two buildings, and we were constantly negotiating with the cable company to provide public access, and to be able to provide public access and to be able to have the channel.
And this was Jones Intercable at the time, or do you remember?
It was actually.
It was Jones, wasn't it?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think so.
I forgot that. Yeah.
Yeah, we got something going with them.
So originally you had nothing to do with the city. There was no contract with the city.
No contract with the city at all. No, in fact, the cable company said, because we'd got so involved and got so many community members, we would like you to run the channel. So the cable company asked us to do the channel.
Yeah, first we were just going to act as a media center and get people involved to take programs out to them to run.
Right.
And they didn't want that burden. And when they saw we were serious and actually setting up, and they said, would you like to run it? And we said, fine.
Yeah, so we were delighted about that because that was our goal, our long-term goal.
And they had told us where we were on 2nd Avenue that by the time they got their system all set up, they would have a cable running down the railroad just behind, not too far from us. They said, you're fine there, we'll be able
with
to
a
hook
hub
you up.
so that we could hook up.
And finally, about a year later, they said, oh, sorry, we're not going to cable that for a couple years yet. So we had to move, and we went up to Veranda Street then.
Yeah. So we were at 115 Veranda, and they finally got us through. And then at one point, do you know the date that we finally started hooking up?
Yes. They told us, we were frantically trying to set up the facility, and they said, you have to have it on the cable, programming on the cable by October 1st, or we're going to drop it. And it went on September 30th.
So there you have a little bit of the history of our esteemed public access station. I have some excellent guests right now, Hakeem Bellamy and Tom Dent, who are going to sort of elaborate on this. One of the first things I would like to do, though, is just take the public through a timeline for public access, because you need to understand that our little tiny station is actually somewhat historic. And so this all stems from the Communications Act of 1934, signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But the whole sort of onus of public access and the impetus behind it happened in the 60s. 1963 in particular, there was a lot of civil unrest happening. And there was a series of protests by Dr. Martin Luther King in the South that started to create the whole publicity around the Birmingham campaign and caused America to sort of become very polarized around the issue. So Kennedy, President Kennedy, June 11th, 1963, tragically, gives a speech where he calls for legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in facilities which are open to the public: hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, and similar establishments. He also says, as well as greater protections for the right to vote. How bizarre that we've come full circle, and this is the issue going on right now with all the civil unrest. So this is extremely timely. This becomes the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Unfortunately, as we know, President Kennedy is assassinated. That whole momentum gets kind of ground to a halt because people are grieving so hard, but there's still some pressure. And so July 2nd, 1964, Civil Rights Act gets signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. Reluctantly, he's not really behind it, but the public is pushing him so much. And the series of civil unrest that keep escalating happened from 1964 to about 1967. And there's more and more pressure on the president. And so in July 28th, 1967, he forms the 11-member National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorder, which is, it's a really interesting thing you can do research on. But this was an attempt to explain to the general public, who's freaking out about all of this, what the riots are and why they're plaguing these major cities. And so because there's now this public sort of official attention on it, a Kerner Commission is formed. This is February 29th, 1968. This is known as the Kerner Report, which concludes that, quote, the nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. And that's in the documents. Martin Luther King hears about this. He pronounces the report, quote, a physician's warning of approaching death with a prescription for life. Meaning we're starting to see some hope, and then of course they assassinate him. Then, April 4th, we lose the beloved Dr. Martin Luther King. June 5th, we lose Robert Kennedy. All of this turmoil and all of this grief becomes this upswelling of how do we get the people's voice heard, especially through these new mediums. And so President Johnson, though he does not implement the Kerner Report, initiates sort of, because of his resistance, this huge grassroots movement to address racial inequalities that are inherent across the country. And so the origins of public access comes from this black and white polarity that is sort of governing the country at this time, and people not knowing what to do with it, people trying to find their voices. And so in 1968, public access in New York kicks in by Fred Friendly. He's the television advisor to the Ford Foundation, Mayor John Lindsay's advisory task force leader. He recommends cable companies set aside 2 channels the public can lease for a minor fee. And so the idea is, with all of these commercialized airwaves, since the 1934 Act, those airwaves are supposed to belong to the people. Why don't we have airwaves specifically for the people? And so in 1970, 2 cable companies in New York agree to supply cable service to Manhattan, and the agreement requires 4 channels become public access, 2 for the city government and 2 for the public. And so this kind of escalates and it takes off over the country, and this starts because of a gentleman named George Stoney at NYU. And if we have time later, we will show you a little bit about him. But he's the great-grandfather of public access in America. And Bill and Denise, who you just saw in that footage, had actually come out from some training experiences with him on fire to form a public access station. And they'd originally started in California, which hadn't worked out. And thank God for us, they came here and found that little broken down storefront. They started it as a 501c3. They called it quote unquote. And as we said, there was no city sponsorship at the time. They were just pulling it out of thin air and just allowing people to come into this little space. And they had a few cameras that someone could check out like it was a library. And they were starting to create content. And so then 1984, the Cable Communications Act, which is the most important part of this, comes into play because cable is such a rogue entity at that point. They realize they need to narrow it down and have some guidelines similar to what they've already had. And this allows funding from the government to start going to the public and education and government channels. So when you think about these stations, think of them as PEG channels, public, education, and government. We will talk about that here with Albuquerque. These are our PEG channels. 1985, Bill and Denise contact with City of Albuquerque to run quote unquote. The rest is history. We have had some turnover since then. There's been some very interesting situations that happened and some attempts to basically kind of sell off the channels, but the public won, and we are here because the public won, and we are back in our historic station. And I am here to, first of all, speak to Tom Dent. I would like to just sort of bring you on board in terms of a little bit of your history with, like, quote unquote, and how you got involved in speaking to the public through the medium of public access.
I've had a lot of friends that used to be involved with quote unquote in the original programming. I got involved with the Peace Center in earnest back in 2011, and then I was on the board for 3 years up until 2016. And the whole time I was on the board, I was pushing for getting back on the public airwaves. I was pushing for low-powered FM radio, and it's now, since the city has gotten the station rolling last summer and had an open house and invited people in to do programming last September, we grabbed onto this opportunity, and now we're in our 10th episode.
And I would also like to introduce Hakeem Bellamy. He is a part of Cultural Services. What's your official title?
Sure. Thank you, Lara. I'm the Deputy Director for the newly retitled Department of Arts and Culture. But yes, we were Cultural Services forever until fairly recently. Yes.
So Hakeem, if you can speak to your involvement, especially because you were back in the day too as well. You and Tom both are kind of...
I think Tom and I overlapped by just like this long. But when I first moved to Albuquerque in 2005, right? That's when I came to UNM. I was immediately thrust into the poetry slam scene, and the rest is history. But it was actually being invited by quote unquote to perform, like, hey, come put your poems on the air. So they invited the whole slam team, and the more I came down, the more I got invited back to do more things than just read poems. I got invited to be parts of committees. I got invited to be parts of documenting protests that we were holding around town, and the television's component in that. Like, how do we get the message out to the people who aren't beyond just the people who are showing up? And the more I came and kept showing up, the more I got roped in, which is how public access is supposed to work. You learn a few more jobs the more you keep showing up. And I was eventually invited to be on the board, and so that was 2007 maybe through 2010, 10, 11, 12. So 4 or 5 years I was on a quote unquote board. And then I went and did other things, like had a son and raised a child who's now 13, and full circle became part of Mayor Keller's administration in 2018, and we made it a priority to do this work of getting the station reopened and accessible to the public again.
Well, and so what I would like to speak to is there was an attempt to sell off the channels, and the reason I got involved is because at the time I had been doing activism in the San Francisco Bay Area and found out that there was a desire by the Wi-Fi companies to take over the cable bandwidth that was public access. And so there's been a battle. You can read about it all sorts of places. We became a sort of template battleground for that, and the public really rallied. And I have to say, Cultural Services, all the activists from this community did an extraordinary job of just showing up and demanding that public airways, that we have something that represents the public, that isn't corporatized, that isn't paid for by some agenda or whatever. This is just the people's voice, for the people, by the people, of the people. And so we have one of the oldest public access stations, I will say, kind of continuously running here in our little tiny state of Albuquerque. I'm so proud of it. I'm so delighted that the support that we have from the city right now is extraordinary. I actually, when this started finally moving forward, because I've been fighting for about 12 years on this, I actually cried, cried quite a lot, because I wasn't sure that we were gonna get this back. I was thinking that the whole thing might actually fall apart. And instead the city rallied and got really behind this and did extraordinary work to draft an exceptional contract. And I'm here doing this show because I want people to understand this is for you. We did this for you. We want your voices. We want your stories. We want your talent. We want young student filmmakers to get in here and learn how to do television so they can intern on film sets. This is what public access is about, and it's a place to start that isn't as scary and terrifying as some giant corporate organization where you could lose your job for missing a cut or something. This is a really important place to start and actually make your life grow. I would like, honestly, to play this short segment. We can cut it at a certain point. I would like you to understand that we would not be here without George Stoney from NYU. So if my tech team can just play that segment, I think it's important to remember this is the great-grandfather that's the only reason we're sitting here. It was the negotiations he made. And we need to revere that man. He passed recently at about almost 100 years old. He's our Sally Alice of public access.
I was born July the 1st, 1916, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My mother died when I was 7, and that, of course, changed many things. My father was a failed preacher who made a precarious living selling brushes and vacuum cleaners and that kind of thing. So he was poor but proud, I would say. It never occurred to me that I should make films until after the war, after the Second World War, when a college student, a college friend, Nick Reed, with whom I'd gotten to know in Chapel Hill, started a little educational film unit in Athens, Georgia. Started with the help of the Kellogg Foundation. So he hired me to write scripts. And before long, I was going out and directing.
I first met George when I was a student at NYU, and I think I was a junior, and that was in about 1970. And I was just real interested in what he was doing in terms of using film as a catalyst for social change.
We don't want to be a Canadian citizen. We don't want to be American citizens. They told us a long time ago that we were North American Indians. And today we feel this way too. We feel this way because we think that this reservation is ours. And it does not belong to the white man.
But what was important to me about George was that he was a great collaborator. He was, he allowed a young guy like me to...
So we will post this hopefully on the website so you can watch, because he was an extraordinary gentleman, and he's given us a voice and a template for a voice. I would like to wrap up at this point. We could talk for a long time on this, but Tom, if you have some more to say, in terms of what's going on in the community and how to get people in for programming here.
Right. Well, like you were talking about, there are a lot of meetings that weren't very pretty that went on for a number of years to help get the station back together. There was community meetings. There was cable board meetings. I think that's one of the first times I ran into Hakeem. And like I was saying before, the programming really got started here in January. Studio 519 started with about four people doing their shows, including Don Schrader, who's back on the air. You might remember him from the old quote-unquote days. And I think we're scheduling about 16 different shows here at this point. And the studio is having the program stream with the city, and we're putting ours up on Facebook and YouTube, as well as being aired on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on Channel 27. And we do encourage members of the Peace Center, our allies, friends, activists in the community, if you're interested in production, interested in becoming part of our show, or even starting your own show, contact us at the Peace Center, contact the studio.
So another thing I would like to speak to is just that this is a station where there's no censorship. So, the whole point is this is true free speech. There's no corporate, big brother coming in and telling you what to say. But, we do have hours for specific type of content and that sort of thing. But this is for liberal, conservative, whatever. This is for the voice of the people, which is very diverse and has an incredible array of perspectives. So know that you don't have to be frightened coming in here because you think it's this thing or that thing. This is for the people. We have people doing military shows. We've had all sorts of really interesting programming that truly represents the diversity of Albuquerque. One of the things I just want to we're winding up here, but I would just like to speak to Hakeem about sort of the vision that the city built over, over this dialogue back and forth about what do we do with the channels and how the city perceives this now.
Sure, and I think that's a great segue, Lara, in that the free speech component of the settlement that frankly, quote unquote, championed and won, right? This was over the course of many administrations, and this administration being the one that finally attempted to settle that the grievance that was filed by quote unquote. And one of the real wins for quote unquote and for the city is that free speech has now become, this free speech clause has become part of all of our contracts. So across all the 4 channels you spoke of, the public access, which we're at, the local origination, which is kind of like a 4th channel that's public access, but we created for media makers who can deliver finished packaged goods. Like I make documentaries and I want to air it, so they don't need the studio as much. They have a channel. There's the education channel that quote unquote we are partnering with quote unquote to provide content for, and of course local origination. Let me back up. ProView's, many of the people in the community know ProView's work, and then GovTV. Like across all 4 of those channels now, free speech is embedded in the contracts that are put out by the city to get content for that. And so, like Laura said, there's later hours for different kind of language, but that we want to be that partner that does the original intent, which is Stoney's intent, to say you should be able to walk in on the street and have your message heard just like any large capacity corporation. The idea for New Mexico, where I think it's been particularly fertile, is that stories are literally one of our greatest natural resources. And so the city has a job to do in providing resource to that. The contracts that we have with Windfire and Gary Williams, who've got this studio back up and running, the work that Jane Yee and our legal department did in making sure that the franchise agreement still allows for these channels and this space, for us to have this space to tell our stories and share our truths on the air, is critical. So it was a team effort. Our department just happens to be the one that gets on the ground and puts the things in motion to make it happen and be open.
Well, and open is the key word there. The amount of not having to fight anyone or anything when we were presenting our case about how to protect this very precious asset, the support was just phenomenal. And I really do have to make a shout out to Jane Yee. We have so much to thank her for, because she's the one who waded through the thousands and thousands of documents and found the best wording for everything and researched across the country and just fought for us, really wanted this to happen in the most meticulous and perfect way. And so again, it was, one of the reasons I started crying is just the amount of dominoes that went in place and are falling in the right direction now is just so extraordinary. So please, 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 if you get nothing out of this, understand this is for you, and we want your voices, and we want a broad array of voices. We want as many people involved as possible. I think there's a 519, just so we could put something up about the actual studio. So please, please, please go to the website and get to know it. The team that's running it is extremely open and friendly. You can go online and actually schedule to do a visit, because that's how they keep track of the numbers of how much of the public is coming through. So it's really important to work it through that. Take a screenshot of this or something, but please, please become a part of this brilliant, brilliant, beautiful asset. Keep it going for another 100 years. And I would like to thank my guests. I would like to close out here and just say, free speech is the last bastion of human rights in America. And these little precious channels are one of the best ways that we exemplify that to the public. So thank you to my guests.
Thank you.
Thank you to the people who fought for this. Thank you to the station. Thank you to the team who's running it. And thank you to the audience who's watching this show. We love you. Keep coming back. Tell others. And let's start seeing your shows up here as well. Bless you all, and goodbye from the Saturday Show.
Welcome back to That Saturday Show. I'm Jim Harvey, your host, and I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing an incredible and fantastic author and crafter today. But we're going to talk about her book today, the latest book that she has published. Her name is Gwen Samuels, The name of the book is A Second Chance. It is not her first book by any stretch of the imagination. She's done Being Black and at Risk. COVID-19 Survivor tells her story. She has done Sharing African Culture Through Fabric, which was an interview, and Nine Patch Life, which is a collection of poems. Gwen is a retired New Jersey school teacher, and I love that t-shirt she's wearing with Jersey Shore, Jersey Surf, and she's plugging Jersey today, and I'm not mad at her. She's published her writing starting as far back as high school and college, and during a 6-year period in the 90s, she taught at an independent Black school in New Jersey, the Chad School, which I think is just a wonderful thing. We need more of those schools. This is fascinating. An interesting turn in her background is that she worked as a Superior Court and Certified Court Interpreter and Translator. Gwen is multilingual, and that is quite an achievement right there. She returned to public schools and became an adjunct professor at Seton Hall and Centenary Universities. She is a Japan Fulbright Memorial Fund Scholar and a Korean Foundation Fellow, among many other things. As far as her crafting skills go, she is quilting and fiber arts crafter, does incredible stuff. She's got a show coming up soon, I know, and that's going to be exciting. I've seen a lot of Gwen's work, and it is wonderful work to see. She is a Cave Canem Poetry Fellow, and she's won several awards. So she's a writer, she's a crafter, she's a teacher, she's a translator. She's got multiple skills going for her. And this is an honor to have her on That Saturday Show. Gwen Samuels, welcome to That Saturday Show.
Thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate being on the show and this opportunity to share the message that I have in my most recent book.
It's good to have you here. And I tell you, I read this book, and it's such a work. It's such an incredible work. And I zeroed in on the health and nutrition piece and the conversation about food justice, which is something that we really need to pay a lot more attention to. But could you talk a little bit about, what motivated you to write this particular book? I know you shared that with me, but share it with our audience, and then pull out some of the highlights in here that you really think, we need to zero in on today.
Well, just to give a little bit of background, the full title of the book is A Second Chance, A Black Woman's Story of Recovery from COVID-19.
Right.
So in March, the end of March 2020, I contracted a very severe case of COVID and was hospitalized for 23 days, including 10 days on a ventilator.
Wow.
And I almost didn't make it. If it wasn't for the great care that I got, as well as the care of my children and family members, afterwards, I don't think I would have made it. So I felt like by writing the book, it was a way of expressing my gratitude and giving something back. So I first want to say that I think a real issue for Black people especially, and one of the reasons why we have suffered from COVID more so than other populations, or at least more than white populations, is first and foremost because we suffer from intergenerational trauma. Okay. So, we're a traumatized people, whether we want to admit it or not. It doesn't mean we're any less capable or less intelligent, but we have suffered a lot of trauma throughout, 4 centuries in this country. So when you couple that with a really poor diet that is loaded with pesticides and genetically modified foods and foods that are not organic and processed foods and things like that, it weakens the immune system even further, even more than people who are already suffering from trauma. And so I felt like I needed to get that message out, because I think that many of us, and this includes not just Black people, but people in general, brown people, red people, people in general, they can avoid a lot of really serious illnesses and comorbidities, which make them more susceptible to COVID, or that make COVID harder for them to heal because of the fact that they're eating so poorly. And then on top of that, there's environmental injustice. The NAACP had done a report some years ago, I think it was 2017, saying that environmental injustice, water pollution, pollution of the soil, pollution of the air, is more prevalent in Black and brown communities. So we have all these assaults, and injustices that we have to face. And I wanted to do research on that and put that out there. Now, we may not have as much control over the pollution in the environment, or the pollution in the air and the water. Of course, we have to do our activist work to make those changes, but we do have lots of control over what we put in our bodies.
That's right.
And so I wanted to get that message out there. I wanted it to be out there first and foremost for my family and friends, but then I was like, wait a minute, this is something that's really important for Black and brown people to know, especially.
It's so important. And, I look around, just out right here in Albuquerque alone, and this is like a fast food haven.
Yes.
You can drive through these places and you can pick up the absolute worst stuff, and I see the cars are just lined up every day.
Yes.
And, and the food that people are buying is just, it's the stuff that kills us.
Yes, and makes us kill each other.
And makes us crazy. It affects us not only physically, but affects us psychologically and emotionally. And, and you're right, it's trauma. It all comes down to trauma. And we are re-traumatizing ourselves, I think.
Yes.
By subjecting our bodies, to the kinds of food that's out here. And that's a battle that we have to pick up, and we have to win that battle. Otherwise, nothing else is going to matter. That's how I look at it.
Yes.
Yeah. That's how I look at it.
So, yeah, I think that's first and foremost. Food has to be our first medicine. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that we shouldn't rely on medical doctors, but we can avoid a lot of that, the necessity to rely on them if we take care of ourselves. And then also an important part of healing, I have a really big family. My mother had 10 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And my father had 7 brothers and sisters. Plus my children had, 2 of my children had lived in Africa for a while. So when I got sick and I was on the ventilator, the doctor had told my daughter, there's only a 20% chance that she would live after being on a ventilator. And so my daughter very politely told the doctor, we're not interested in that 20% number, because my mother's going to live. She's going to pull through.
Yeah.
And they called people all over the world, literally. There were people praying for me from Egypt to the tip of South Africa. There were people praying for me from one coast to another. I had many students from Latin America. People in Latin America were praying for me. And I think it's important to acknowledge, not all of us have this strong basis in religion, or even in spirituality. But I think most of us feel that there is a higher being, and that prayer does also heal. So praying, and sending good wishes my way was a really big part of it as well.
We have no idea how powerful, the unity of good thoughts, powerful thoughts, positive thoughts, prayer, there's so much power in that. And, and that's part of what I think slows our evolution, is that we just haven't come to terms with how powerful the unification, of all of that thinking, could really be. if,
Yeah,
if we
that,
just
that
stopped and did
energy.
it. It's incredible. It's
Yeah.
incredible. I'm a witness to that. I can tell you. Yeah, yeah. So, so tell me, how do you approach your writing, and is there a favorite time of day or night or whatever when you really get into writing?
Well, I will say this, for my poetry writing, my best work, I think, begins in workshop. I love collaborating and writing with other poets. But most of the time, my revision of my poems and perfecting the poems, that comes late at night. So I tend to be a night owl with that. When it's quiet, and I can sort of just go inside of myself, is really helpful. But this book was my first attempt at nonfiction and not a poetry book. So I was sitting in my chair because I couldn't do anything else. When I came home from the hospital, literally I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. I could barely talk. My kids told all of my friends, look, sorry, mom's doing okay, but she can't talk now. So for at least the first month and a half, 2 months, I didn't talk to anyone. All I did was sit in my easy chair with my pen and my pencil and a composition notebook. And I was just writing. And, my daughter found it unbelievable because she's actually writing her dissertation.
Wow.
And she's having a hard time, getting writing done while she was caring for me. But yet I was just constantly writing. So in about maybe a month's time, I think I pushed out more than half of the book, and it, like I said, it was because I couldn't do anything else except hold a pencil.
Well, it was time well spent.
Yes, thank you.
It was time well spent. It really was. Yeah. So are there any special projects you're working on right now that you could share with us?
Well, I do have 2 poetry books. One is a shorter chapbook of poems on COVID, my experience with COVID that I'm writing, and another book of poetry, which is entitled Rumbo Sur, which means southbound.
Southbound. Yeah.
And it's basically a collection of poems honoring, my love for the South, being a person who was born in the Jim Crow South. And in some ways, there were better days, there, because we were much closer as a people. So those poems speak to that. And then there's 2 other projects that I would like to, in terms of writing. One is I'd like to write a recipe book. And I started many of my recipes, I'm calling it a bootleg gourmet. And the reason I'm calling it that is because I'm trying to create like healthy versions of our soul food, as well as some, really strictly, vegan type healthy foods, but focusing on organic, non-GMO healthy foods. And maybe one day I'll also write about my recovery from cancer. I attribute my recovery from both cancer and COVID to the fact that I had a really good diet, great family support, and lots of prayer.
Chronicling those kinds of journeys through, some critical health challenges, is worth sharing. I can tell you because my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2007. And the moment she got that diagnosis, and she had lived a rough life, she decided to do a complete 180 and went totally holistic, didn't want to do any of the traditional stuff, no chemo, no radiation, none of that. Went on a holistic diet, and she stuck around until 2016.
Wow.
She stuck around until 2016. So, eventually she lost that battle, but, it could have been a lot worse. It could, and she could have left here a lot sooner than she did, but I think that her diet made a tremendous difference. And even, you even have to have a health crisis but just take hold of your health, for just basic purposes. You want to live well and you want to live a long time.
Exactly.
And what we do is so yeah, so chronicling your health, your journey through this health crisis, is something that I look forward to. And and I hope that you'll share it with us all very soon.
Yeah,
I
that
do.
in itself, the writing in itself is also very healing,
Yeah,
So it puts a lot of the angst that you have during illness outside of you.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So in the last minute we've got here, crafting and that fiber art stuff that you're doing. Talk to us a little bit about that, because share it with us, because I mean, I've seen some of the things you've done, but I mean, I'm looking forward to having you back on the show and sharing with our audience some of the beautiful work that you turn out. So tell us a little bit about what inspires you to do that kind of crafting you do.
Well, from the time I was really small, like maybe around 5 years old, I learned how to sew at my grandmother's knees, basically. She had a little sewing room in the house. She lived with us, and I would just kind of sit down on the floor, and she would give me scraps. I would make things for my dolls, and so I always loved sewing, and I loved my grandmother so much that I wanted to do all the things that she did. We had many tailors and seamstresses in the family. That was kind of a family tradition. And my grandmother was from that generation where they made everything, bedspreads, curtains, pillows, you name it. And so I was sewing from a very young age, but it wasn't until I was already an adult that I discovered quilting. There were some quilters in my family as well, but not as much as, garment making and making things for the home. And I loved quilting so much, I just took off with it. And that was like regular quilting, 3 layers of fabric. But then when I came to New Mexico, I learned punch quilting, which is a little bit different. And I just feel like that in addition to healing me, when I create things of beauty, like bright, colorful, beautiful things, when people see them, they say, "Oh, wow, that's so pretty," and automatically a good feeling, a feeling of healing, begins in the viewer of it as well. So I do it for my own healing, and I do it also for the healing of the people in the community that view it. It's very important to me to, especially to present work that depicts the people of and the stories, the culture of the African diaspora in beauty and in pride and in truth. So that's what I try to focus on.
We've been talking today with Gwen Samuels, resident of Albuquerque, teacher, author, crafter, all around absolutely wonderful, wonderful woman who has a story to tell in everything she does. And we look forward to having you back sometime soon, Gwen. Thank you so much for being on that Saturday show.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Until the next time, it's time to say goodbye. When you out here in the streets, keep it real, 505. We love everybody, we just want to let you know. Thanks for tuning in to that Saturday show.